Mr. Dave H. Stevens, who is a CMB. He's also the CEO of Mountain Lake Consulting. Dave has also served as the Assistant Secretary for Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner at HUD. He has more than 30 years of experience in mortgage finance and has held several executive level positions in senior management with Wells Fargo, Freddie Mac, World Savings. And prior to his appointment by the Obama administration to serve HUD, Dave was the president and COO of the Long and Foster companies. He's known as a key housing influential, serving as an industry authority on major mortgage financial, legislative, and regulatory issues. He's often quoted in the national and trade media and regularly appears on television and radio to offer insight on issues affecting the mortgage and housing markets. In 2013, Dave received the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals Founders Award, and he has been named to Bloomberg's 50 Most Powerful People in Real Estate and twice recognized as one of the top 100 most influential real estate leaders. Dave was also named to Mortgage Professional America's The Hot 100 list. He currently serves on the board of MBA Open Doors Foundation. And for any of you Colorado graduates, he is a graduate of the University of Colorado in Boulder. And if I might add a personal note, by creeping on his LinkedIn, he has a gorgeous family. It seems to be a growing family. So without further ado, good morning, Mr. Stevens, and welcome to our Zoom.
Hey, Colleen, thank you. Hey, everybody. Good to be with you. I noticed some folks are on cell phone. If there's any chance you can get on video version, I'm going to share some slides. But I always love the intro because, you know, like most of you, I began in this business as a loan rep selling neg-am arms. And in Denver, Colorado for World Savings, back when rates were, you know, 16 to 18%, depending on what product you were getting. Somehow from that background, I made it through Senate confirmation, Secret Service background checks, and met with the president on a regular basis. How they let me in that room, I often wonder. But look, here we are today. And what I want to do is spend a few minutes talking about what's happening sort of as we think about the COVID virus, what may happen going forward, and how this affects our business and the economy. And I like doing these. I do them a lot because I think facts really matter. And a lot of us can get wrapped up in emotion or just pundits on TV or who write op-eds who may not be deeply steeped in fact. And so I'm going to pull data from a variety of economists, including Mike Fratantoni from the MBA, but Mark Zandi and others, because I want to paint a picture about where we are. So let's do that. Then we can get back and talk about the 50 basis point fee or whatever's on your mind as we go forward with the time that's left. So, yeah, so as was in my intro, I am now CEO of a company called Mountain Lake Consulting. I actually planned on retiring when I left the MBA. I think it's the vast majority of you know I have cancer and I've been fighting that for a number of years. And I was going to go play with my grandkids and kids and hang out on my lake and travel. Unfortunately, I got tapped into a few advisory roles, and I sit on a board of a New York Stock Exchange listed real estate investment trust. And I still work very actively in policy, and I continue to be in the media to poke at regulators that I think are doing a bad job, which is a great place to be because they can't raise my G fees and there's nothing they can do to really hurt me, so I can speak my mind. So that's where we are today. It's great to be with all you guys. So I'm going to just go through a number of slides to paint this picture. So bear with me here. You know, this is what we're all looking at every day. What we thought was going to be a recovery as it seemed to be trending downward in May and June has been spiking upwards ever since. And the COVID cases are scaring everybody. And as we can all see from the most recent headlines, universities that opened are having to close again. And many of you are dealing with that if your kids are off in college, or maybe they've already come back, or maybe they haven't left yet, whatever condition they may be in. But even Notre Dame finally realized, despite announcements that they were going to play football, that they had to slow down their, on-campus activities. And, it surprises me because, of course, college kids are going to be responsible and not party with each other. But, God forbid, they ultimately did that. So that's where we're at. I don't mean to make humor of it, but I at some point, you got to have some sarcasm. This is from Mark Zandi, the chief economist for Moody's Analytics. Mark is one of the most highly regarded economists in the Beltway. He was John McCain's chief economist when McCain ran for president. But he's also with obviously the largest ratings agency in the world, and Mark speaks globally, so people listen to what he has to say. This is a recent deck of his, and what he's looking at is what happens with COVID. And I'll show you another one that juxtaposes the economy next to it. But as you can see, if you go to the blue line on the left, we peaked in the very beginning, then it started trailing down. Everybody thought it was great. Social distancing collapsed. People weren't wearing masks. They were partying on the beaches in Florida and Texas and elsewhere. And suddenly the cases started skyrocketing again. His forecast going forward is this, that we're going to reach stabilization. Stabilization will occur. It's still a terrible thing, right? We'll be leveling off at pretty high numbers of daily confirmed cases. But then it's going to start dropping down here pretty shortly. And that's because people are going to go, oh, wow, maybe we shouldn't have opened that quickly. Maybe our university shouldn't have opened that quickly. Man, maybe we should require mask wearing. I live full-time on a lake in Southern Virginia, Smith Mountain Lake. And I'm up in DC now, but I live in a lake in Southern Virginia. And in the early phases, the grocery stores weren't requiring masks. They were asking for it, and there were maybe half the store had masks on. Now they have people at the doors making people wear masks. That's how you get stabilization. So from Zandi's perspective, in terms of how the virus goes, well, it won't be a vaccine yet. We're going to have a stabilization. We're going to have accommodations occurring as people continue to clamp down on protections. Then a vaccine will come forward. At some point, it's going to get distributed, and we're into resolution. So that's sort of the general consensus view. By the way, I could show you about 8 different slides from 8 different economists, all showing the same sort of general trend. And so what does this mean for the economy? You can juxtapose these two. The spike up is the spike down in GDP. And so, don't think about the vaccine in terms of how it affects your economy directly, because the fact that we did reopen, even if it was reckless and endangered people, we ended up creating more economic activity, and thus we started going into a quick recovery. So the spike down in the second quarter, April, May, June, was followed by a spike up, which we're in right now in Q3, which is June, July, August, and that's what's showing the growth of the economy. Now it's leveling off because we don't have a vaccine and because there's still some irresponsibility, and some businesses are having to re-shut down again. But nevertheless, it's growing, and it's expected to keep growing as we look out into post-pandemic recovery once the vaccine begins to be distributed. But this view really is a juxtaposition of this, but this is related specifically to the economy. So let's look forward. So what does this mean about housing and the economy, specifically what you guys do for work? Excuse me, this is from Mitsubishi. I'm not going to go how I get their information, but they're what I view as the best global economist team. And they look at sovereigns from around the globe. This is one deck just on the United States. But I just want you to look at, I'm going to focus in on it. If you look at the top line, this is GDP forecast. And they're projecting that for full year 2020, we'll have a net 5% downcline in GDP. Mike Frattantoni has it a little worse at the MBA, but pretty much the same single digit downward trend. And then 2021, we get back to roughly a 3% GDP growth rate, which is pretty consistent where we've been in past years and forward years. So I'll show you why that is. But on the far right, this is sort of the quarter by quarter look. So, first quarter started slowing because we were expecting some economic slowdown anyway, but I'm not going to go into the nits and bits of that. But you can see Q2, the negative 32% drop in GDP, followed by a huge spike back upward in Q3, not recovering completely, but recovering a great amount of that. And then some ongoing stabilized growth beginning Q4. So that's their look. And I will tell you again, this is very consistent. I could show you a bunch of other slides given time. We can't go through that and I would bore you all, but I also want you to look at the Mitsubishi forecast of federal funds target rate. And
That's it, Diana Jeremiah.
Pardon me? Okay. So if you look at the forecast federal funds target rate, you see that the Fed funds rate is expected to remain very low for 2021-22 going forward, but rising no later than 2023. Mike Fratantoni thinks it's going to rise earlier. We can talk about some of that if there's time. So let's focus in on a couple of items. One, what's different about this pandemic versus the Great Recession you guys just went through? The 100-year recession that we just had 10 years ago, the second 100-year recession in a decade. The difference between this, which is the red line, and the Great Recession, which is the blue line was longer, it was more painful, it took a longer time to recover, and it was built on an unsustainable credit standard in the credit markets, primarily in mortgages, but it did spread across a variety of different markets. And that's what really took down the economy, plus terrible demographics. If you look at this economic downturn, we had an extraordinarily strong economy, as you see from the left side of the red line. But the spike was simply due to a virus. The impact to the economy was much worse. It was a sharper and deeper cut. The wound was much worse, but the recovery from that wound is going to be much quicker. And that's because the moment we have a vaccine in place, it's expected that a lot of what you guys are feeling already in the housing sector is going to spread to other sectors of the economy as we reemploy. Now, it's going to take a while, and there's going to be impacts to small businesses and to certain travel industries and entertainment industries, but we are going to see the recovery. We're already seeing some of this now. The other thing that I think explains a lot of what you guys are seeing is, this is from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. I don't know if any of you guys ever use FRED. It's a great resource from the Federal Reserve. You can get any kind of data you want. But this is one looking at unemployment rate. I only have June data. They haven't published July yet, but it'll be out shortly. But it's unemployment rate by educational attainment. And the point being here that this recession impact from COVID is not felt equally by all. So if you have a lower degree, if you're less degreed or have lower academic achievement, the unemployment rate is in the mid-teens. But if you have a bachelor's or higher, it's in the single digits. And the point for this slide, and there's a lot of ones I was going to use, but I figured this would be a good proxy, is it's not a universal truth, because there are folks that you've done loans for that have less than a high school diploma and bought a house. But as a mean, in terms of averages, you're going to have a higher propensity of bachelor's and graduate degrees in home ownership, and a higher propensity of less academic achievement in rental. And so why is the home market on fire? Because, frankly, particularly in the markets where you work, it's less impacted by COVID because more people are keeping their jobs through this pandemic, or at minimum, maybe half of the household is keeping their job, but they're able to get through this period of time. So, this is an interesting data point to look at. I'm going to show you a few more. Here's what a variety of economists are looking at as indicators about what's happening with the economy. Of course, this is the MBA, and they looked at services and manufacturing. Those are the solid lines. The dotted lines are the employment for those industries. As you can see on the far right, from the spike down to now, quick recovery, right? So a sharp return. We're not back all the way on the employment dotted line, but the employment will follow the growth of the industries itself, because demand will require, ultimately affects employment. So that's a slide from the MBA. I'm going to show you a few other economist slides. Sorry, the horizontal axis along the bottom is months of this year. But this is just change and requests for directions on Apple Maps. I love this one, right? So it tells you that in March and April, where it spikes downward, people weren't looking for where to go. Now they are. And so it's starting to come back, right? So it's an interesting indicator. U.S. hotel occupancy rates. This is sort of a surprise, but this only goes through the end of June, but it shows that we were seeing people go back to hotels. And obviously, for those of you who've taken a vacation, if you stayed in a hotel, or your kids went somewhere, or you have friends who have gone, frankly, the fact that we know so many people who still aren't traveling and that this is still showing this growth is pretty incredible. And it's a really strong indicator about how strong this economy is and where the demand is, pent-up demand particularly. This is from Mitsubishi, their slide on part of their deck on the US economy, but jet fuel consumption. It reached a 34-year low point from March to mid-May, but now it's on a rebound. And it's not just people traveling for leisure or some business. It's also jet fuel consumption for goods and services based on the Amazon effect and other things that are putting planes back in the air. For all of you, this is why we're seeing different outcomes in forbearance. This is a slide from MBA, but I don't want you to get too wrapped up into it other than to note that in the beginning, these are week-long periods going back to the last week of May. While we were still getting people into forbearance, this tells you where they were exiting. So the blue, which is the biggest sections of those bars going through late June, are canceled or stay current. In other words, what we knew, what you guys knew, is somewhere around 20%-ish of all people who were put into forbearance plan never used it. They just stayed current or they canceled it very quickly. There wasn't a lot of exiting going on. But now as we go to the far right in July, you're starting to see outcomes, what's happening to people as they leave. And if you look at the orange, light orange, and purple, and juxtapose that across, it's reinstatement, payment or deferral, a partial claim, and modification or combo. So now you see that people actually leaving forbearance, those that are leaving, are going into the workout plans that have been made available by the GSEs or the FHA, VA, USDA. And so that's what we're going to start seeing going forward. This will be an interesting chart to look at. NBA, Mike Fratantoni puts this out. It's one I'm going to keep watching. So let me move around the corner then. So what's this mean for all of you guys? I don't need to tell you what's happening because your pipelines are jam full. And the fact you could even join a call and come up for air is surprising. But let's just look at what's happening in the market. The left is one of a million articles from the end of July. Diana Olick at CNBC, but weekly mortgage demand from home buyers spikes even higher, up 19%. I mean, home buying is the real story here. I mean, refinancing is a reflection on interest rates and the Fed's actions, but the home buying demand is extraordinary. And the NAHB, the home builders, just 2 days ago put out their housing market index, and builder confidence is at an all-time high. It's a record high with record traffic. Never seen before in the history of this index. So, you're going to see, the problem is we're not building them quick enough. And as you know, there's not enough inventory, particularly in the most competitive markets. And so we have multiple offers going on, et cetera. So what's going to happen going forward? So the Fed, as we showed earlier, basically cut rates to zero. This is the MBA forecast that they're going to hold until 2022. I will tell you, I'll show you in the Fratantoni forecast in a minute because it's actually not the most conservative and it's not the most liberal. But just what the Fed does doesn't necessarily impact what it means for your mortgage rates. And so I think that's a really important discussion as we move forward, what happens to rates. And that's even without thinking of what Mark Calabria might do to add-on fees and things of that sort. But in the short run, these are great slides, right? I mean, housing is the story. The left is purchase activity, and this is a seasonal chart. So it shows the black line, which is 2020 month. It's actually week by week of the year compared to the previous 4 years. We're blowing away the previous 4 years, these recent weeks. Now, obviously, it's recovering from that lull you see that started happening in March, but the recovery is extraordinary. And then when you look at the upside again, this is from Mark Zandi, same story. Housing is the surprise upside to this story, and something that is really just an amazing outcome in the midst of a pandemic. I'm going to say this once, and I'll say it again before we're done. You guys should kiss the ground you walk on that you happen to pick the mortgage business because think of any other industry in the United States that's doing as well as this. It's phenomenal. You're having many of you, or most of you, are having the best years you've ever had in your career, while the nation is suffering. And it's a terrible thing that the nation's suffering. It's a wonderful thing that you're in this business and able to provide for your families and help other families around your markets to either get a home or improve their home payment. So as we look forward, the MBA expects home price appreciation to remain stable. They show it slowing, but still remaining stable. If you listen to Mike Fratantoni present this, I love Mike because in my view, he's probably the best economist in America. Even though he's housed at the MBA, he's a PhD from Wharton and an adjunct professor at several universities, a brilliant guy. But he actually thinks the slowing is a good thing. He thinks that the pace we were on in 13 and 17 in particular was outpacing wages, and that was not a good thing for home ownership. So actually stable growth that keeps in line with wage increases is a really nice balance to have for an economy. One of the things that's driving all of this is inventory. This is from Y charts, and please ignore the spikes because this isn't seasonalized, so it shows it month by month. But the spikes downward are basically because everybody takes their homes off the market over the December holiday. And so that's why we always see inventory drops each year during that period of time. But look at the 1.36 million, which is their most recent chart, and just trend line it going back. Where we are at, remarkably low inventory levels. And this is not felt evenly across the country. Your market impact is worse. If you were to think about available inventory in key markets in Maryland and Virginia and DC versus key markets in Iowa or what have you. This is just a very unique scenario where we have no inventory. We have historically low rates. We have relatively still low unemployment for professionals. And then we have amazing demographics. So this is from CoreLogic. This is Frank Notaf, the chief economist there. He used to be the chief economist at Freddie Mac. This is his year-over-year forecast appreciation rates. And look, all the major markets are going to see growth, but who's the number one growth area in the nation? Yep, your backyard. This is the Washington D.C. MSA, which includes almost all of you. I don't think it includes Baltimore. So, but Baltimore, as you know, is also strong. So this is just a remarkable chart reflecting that. First of all, we have a lot of economic conditions which are driving your business, but you happen to be in perhaps the strongest of all markets, a lot of which is the source of employment in your markets is less volatile. I mean, we do have entertainment, we have small business like any marketplace would, hotels, et cetera, but we also have a huge military presence and government presence, which is more stable, and then a whole incredible volume of contractors that support those businesses. That's an example of what keeps our market more stable than other markets in the country. A lot of this stuff is great to show realtors, by the way, so I'm going to send this deck after I'm done. But as we think about what happens next, depending on the interest rate, you have a lot of refinanceable product. This is a great chart that shows by interest rate how much is refinanceable. Today at 3% roughly, there's 18.5 million refinanceable candidates in the country. If we head into the mid-twos firmly, which is where I think we're going to end up, assuming, again, the FHFA doesn't drive rates higher arbitrarily, you guys are going to have a hell of a year for the rest of this year. And honestly, I think the first half of next year is going to be extraordinary. I'm almost done, guys, so I'll be ready to talk about whatever you want. So let's go to forecasting. And this one's really important because the MBA is right in the middle of Fannie and Freddie. Fannie's more aggressive. As you know, they're over $3 trillion in their forecast. If you've seen any of their forecast numbers recently, Freddie is more conservative. Mike is right at 2.8 trillion for 2020. If you look at the third bar from the right, so he's at 2.8 trillion in total mortgage volume. The blue line is the refi volume at roughly 1.5 trillion. And then the red line is purchases at 1.3. The thing I want to highlight to you as you think about your planning is don't forget 2021 and 2022, because I believe Mike's right. I think rates are going to rise sometime early to mid next year, and that will result in the $700 billion loss in overall volume between this year and next year. Now, you guys are all saying, that's great, we're doing so well, we can afford $700 billion. I will argue that I think the industry is oversupplied and will be by the time the year is over, because everybody's hiring as many bodies as they can for this. And so when you look at this contraction, particularly, and it's all going to be driven by refis, because as you can see, the purchase line continues to grow. The degree by which certain members of this call today have done a better job maintaining and investing in their realtor and referral partner relationships, I think they'll be better off when the market shifts. So this is a make hay while the sun shines scenario. I'll just give you one of the couple of reasons why Mike believes rates are going to rise and why I agree with him as well. The Treasury last week auctioned off the biggest Treasury auction ever in US history. The amount of debt we're having to auction in order to cover the deficit and the interest payments on that deficit, a lot of it driven by COVID as of recent legislation, is extraordinary. And so you need buyers for that Treasury debt. If you don't have enough buyers, obviously prices will drop and yields will rise. So that's one area where you can see Treasuries rise. The other area is MBS, mortgages. The Fed has been the biggest buyer of mortgages in the world. They're still buying $40 billion a month of MBS. They're going to stop buying. They've already bought more mortgage-backed securities than they ever intended or want. And so as the economy begins to improve post-vaccine, they're going to start scaling back their MBS purchases. That'll create less demand. Prices will drop. Yields will rise. So one way or the other, you're going to have upward pressure on rates, whether it's inflation or simply because we lose our biggest buyer of mortgage-backed securities. One way or the other, there won't be the demand to suck up all that volume in the market. And that's why your rates are going to rise no matter what happens with Fed funds. So not terrible, right? $2 trillion year is a good year. It's about equal to last year, better than some of the previous years. But there will be some right sizing that has to take place in the market. Okay, I'm on the last two slides. So hang in there. This is a really great slide, and I want you to recognize why this recession is different than the last one. So this is household formation. This data comes from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. And the red bars are growth in rental households formed in a year. The blue lines are changes in owner-occupied households formed in a year. And as you can see, if you go back to 07 and 08, that's when the Great Recession hit us, based on terrible credit being created through subprime and breathe on the mirror, negams, and more. That, along with terrible demographics, really crushed the market. And the demographics are bad because, as you can see in this chart, the only thing growing was rental housing. We were actually losing owner-occupied households. We were losing homeowners year after year after year. And in some cases, 600,000 homeowners lost in a year, not just because of the recession, just because this was the millennial generation. And I'll give you my example. In 07 and 08, I have 4 kids. My household was a household of one. I either had kids living in my house or in graduate school or in college. Today, they're all on their own. They all have their own homes and they all have jobs. And my oldest is on her second owner-occupied home. But that was the millennial generation back then. We were losing owner-occupied households. Go to the far right. Now we're gaining owner-occupied households at about $1.5 trillion, a trillion units per year. This is what's causing your housing shortage. But this demand, this millennial generation, is now in their peak buying years. The biggest cohort of the millennial generation is going to reach 32 years old next year. And that's the peak buying year for home ownership. I compare this to the baby boom generation, of which I am, that drove the housing market for the last several decades. This is right in your front windshield, and it's coming at you big and strong, and you've got years more of home purchase demand that nobody can stop. No realtor can stop it, and you can't stop it. We're going to have extraordinary growth in that area. So in the end of the day, while all of us are looking at the shock and awe of the news, of the COVID growth rates, of colleges shutting down and wondering what's going to happen here, I just want you to reflect back to those first couple of slides that show that are an honest and credible look at where we are, and how we will recover and how quickly we will recover. And in the end of the day, math matters. You guys are in a world where you have historically low interest rates, you have terrible inventory levels, which is going to put upward pressure on home prices. We've got great demographics with millennials coming out in droves to buy homes, and pent-up demand from being locked in condos and apartments in downtown DC or Rockville or Bethesda or wherever they've been. And you've got geography, because you're in the best, you're one of the best markets in the United States from an economy standpoint and for housing. So I'll end with this. I'll shut this deck down. We can talk about anything you want, but I really believe that leaders are dealers in hope. I love this line from Napoleon, and all of you are leaders. You people call you and say, what do you think? Real estate agents are dying for this stuff. I'll tell you that from my background, I've done Brian Buffini. I did his show, I don't know, a few weeks ago. That we had over 100,000 people on that show. I did one of these, a similar deck, not all as much about the forbearance and stuff, but I did one for Holly Worthington's Compass office in DC. Next thing you know, the Compass guys in New York at headquarters are asking me to do this for their whole company. Remax had me do this for their whole company nationwide. You guys can take this deck or parts of it and make it your own and go out and help your referral partners when you can come up for air, be more enthused about the business that they're in and how good it is to be buying a home in this market and how that will create long-term wealth, and they're going to remember you for it. So I think facts are a lot more valuable to us at times like this, given what we're seeing every day and the raw emotions that are being exposed on the airwaves and in the press. A lot of it, which is opinion-based and not fact-based. So I will stop there. Hope that's helpful.
No, very helpful. Thank you so much. Do you want to unmute so they can ask questions, Amanda? Or do you have any questions in like the chat box, David? I'm going to look. I see two.
It's 2 comments.
Okay.
So let's talk about the 50 basis point fee and what's happening there. And then, if you guys have anything you want to like argue with, talk about, share examples, that's great too. But so as you know, Calabria, and he did it, the GSEs didn't do it, even though they put out a bulletin, a news piece yesterday from their comms departments explaining why they put the 50 basis point fee in place. Mark did it because he can. I've in articles that I've written, I've quoted testimony from Mark going back to early 2012, where he talked about how to scale the GSEs out of the market. And he talks explicitly about raising G fees and curtailing product types. So he put this 50 basis point fee in on refis solely because he can. And there's no credit standard that justifies this. And I can understand them being concerned about what happens post-forbearance with their portfolio, but a refi is a loan they already own. So they're generally refinancing, the vast majority, 90-ish%, are refinances that they already own the risk on. By putting them into a lower rate, they're improving that risk profile. It actually reduces their expected default rate when they do a refi. So why is Mark adding 50 basis points? It's certainly not a risk-based fee to be adding. So I came out very aggressive on this on Housing Wire and was picked up in Bloomberg or Money and Forbes magazine and a bunch of other stuff. The MBA has done an awesome job. They came out very aggressively. Bob Brooksmith, I thought, was the strongest I've ever heard him. They did a call to action, which generated over 80,000 contacts on the Hill. And they're pushing Calabria directly. I know Bob is having conversations with Mark. And this morning, inside the GSEs just reported that there's a joint letter from senators to Calabria calling on him to pull back the fee. I don't think you're going to lose the 50 bips, but I do think that you're going to the best case would be a delay in the implementation. So you're not having to fund your locked pipeline that closes in September. If it were me and I were the FHFA and trying to implement that, I would say any lock post X date or app post X date after he announced the policy until end of September or prior to the date of announcing the policy to the end of September would be protected. And I think that's probably our best case. We'll see what happens going forward. But the pressure is pretty forceful on FHFA. And honestly, guys, you got to be watching, particularly the MMBA needs to be watching what happens with FHFA. Because I know, Mark, this effort to privatize them and recapitalize them, I know there's a lot of people like that. There are mixed views on it. I worry that he's moving recklessly, far too fast in the middle of a pandemic. I think every step Mark has taken so far has not been favorable to the industry, whether it was liquidity for servicing advances or the first payment forbearance delivery fees, or step by step. He's made public attacks on non-banks, saying that they can fail. He calls them a systemic risk. So I think we got a real problem with this guy. I'm one of the few people who can say it because I don't run a trade group. I don't depend on a relationship with Mark. But for all of you, at some point, you're going to need to consider what you call for, because as he works quickly to exit these guys, I also think he's going to want to impact things like cash out refinances, 2 to 4s and other investment properties, second homes. These are things that he's talked openly about, believing that the GSE should not be doing. So just keep an eye out for them. That's just one suggestion. Any thoughts on if a 1.5 coupon will be created? I don't know, man. I know a lot of guys listen to Barry Habib. He's probably the most optimistic about rates and how low they'll go and for how long. And I can't argue with him because he's proven himself to be right, at least on where we are right now. So I don't really predict rates. And when anybody asks me, should I lock in or should I wait? I'm all for the bird in the hand suggestion, because if rates do go much lower, they can refi later. But in the end of the day, whatever happens with rates here, a lot of it's going to depend on how quickly the economy recovers. And I'll just throw this to you. If a vaccine is discovered earlier and it works and it's effective, and as there's a lot of noise in terms of vaccines being applied to different conditions, elderly using one vaccine, young people using a different one. If it's lumpy like that, it may take a longer time. But if there's a readily available, distributed vaccine that comes sooner, the economy is going to recover sooner, and I can promise you the Fed will start backing away. The moment the economy starts recovering, the Fed is getting out of the MBS purchase business, and your rates will start rising. So my suggestion always is lock them in and get them funded if you can actually handle the capacity. That's your biggest problem right now.
Hey, Dave, there's one question above that from Ken.
Dr. Sonner, delinquency rates published. Yeah, I think the FHA delinquency story is a huge one. And if you bear with me a second here, I'll show you what my concern lies on. So just bear with me. This is the May FHA delinquency report. Sorry, Ken, I've got a chart for everything. But this is the May FHA delinquency report. And as you can see, it was in the 4s and 5s. Okay, so just bear with that. That's 1 month. That's May. Now let's go to June. Here's June. 1 month change. And what I'm looking at are serious delinquency rates. And I want to highlight to you, 250 and above, we're in double digits where we were at 5. I mean, it's almost doubled in a month. I also found it interesting looking at down payment assistance. I think this is an important one because HUD's about to put out a proposed rule that would eliminate or really impair the use of secondary marketing gains for DPA. But if you look at what HFAs are doing, I don't know how many of you are in the DPA world, but HFAs are doing, and Chinoa and other groups, those are government down payment assistance loans, they're actually performing better than gifts from relatives. Gifts from relatives are performing really bad. They used to perform in an incredible way. So what do I make of it? I think FHA is always a stressed portfolio. Whit loves this, by the way. I'm looking at Whit Anderson because, magic, this is where they step in. Use MI, right, Whit? But the FHA does higher stressed loans. I'm not going to share a bunch of other data with you, but 40% of their purchases last year had down payment assistance on them. And their distribution, their concentration rates of FICOs over 43, DTIs over 43, FICOs under 660, they're really high. And I think in many ways, if they didn't do that, we wouldn't have opportunities for many minorities and first-time home buyers who are sustainable. But I do think as well, when things go bad, that portfolio is the first to go bad. If you look, there was an interview with our new commissioner, and she was talking about how she's going to manage the FHA. She talked about herself being a quant geek and liking data. And she indicated to me that she has no intention of ever changing MIP fees downward. I think primarily for that reason. She views herself as a steward. The thing that I would emphasize, Ken, to your question is, even with what I think is an expected increase in delinquency rates for the FHA program, we'll see how many go to default because they have a better workout capability right now. But if they do go to default, we have less severity risk because home prices are remaining stable, particularly for entry-level home buyers. So unlike the 20% house price declines we saw back in the Great Recession, even for those that go to foreclosure, in the most part, the home prices are going to remain relatively stable. So we won't have as bad severity risk on the downturn. And the final point I would just say, as with the MIP premiums they're collecting, remember they collect them on all loans forever. I put the forever in place when I was commissioner, even though some of you don't like it. But when they put the MIP premium on loans forever and at these levels, it can handle a very high default rate, much higher than what they're at now. So I don't think they're going to be in trouble, but it is a worrisome sign, and you don't want to be doing loans for people that are going to go to default en masse. Is there more? Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I will share your slides. I'll send them to probably Amanda, if it's okay with you. I'll send you the slides afterwards. Feel free to use them. And guys, I update this data all the time. I'm constantly doing this stuff, and obviously I have to do a lot of work in Washington. So I have to give fresh data to folks inside the Beltway. You should always get Mike on. I don't know if Colleen or Amanda, if you've asked Mike to do one recently, but he's really good at this. He's got a great deck. And it's all MBA data, so I use other data as well, but I think he's also a good one to keep current information on and current views on.
Thanks, I appreciate that. We'll definitely do that. Do we have anything else?
Anything else for you guys?
Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.
Look at Ken's question.
What is it?
Ken, what a bait trap that was.
You're going to comment on the election. Ooh.
Actually, Dave, I was going to ask you that question too, but I didn't want to be that person. So thanks, Ken.
Here's what I would say. And actually, I had Mike on. I moderated him for a thing just this last week. Any George Mason guys are on the phone. You were on that call probably. But here's how Mike puts it. And he actually referenced that it's what we both share the same view. There are benefits and disadvantages to either party being in control. With the Republican Party, you tend to get an erring towards less regulation. And you can see that particularly with comments coming from the CFPB and actions being taken there. And, frankly, pulling back affirmatively furthering fair housing while it upset the consumer advocates and others. And frankly, I think it was a bad move to make from the administration. That's pulling back regulation. So a lot of you like that, and that's and they'd be in favor of that from the standpoint of a Republican administration. The negative is you get folks like Calabria, who are libertarians, who have testified openly multiple times that they think the government should be out of housing finance, and you may end up getting distortions in the marketplace. And frankly, I think every move that Mark has made so far that have affected our business, starting with his comments about non-banks in the very beginning before COVID, and now all his actions in COVID, I think every one of them has been negative for our business. I can't think of one that's been good. I mean, yeah, he capped the forbearance period at 4 months before they kick in, but that was after him saying, I'm not going to give you liquidity. And we're still not done yet. I think there are going to be servicers who need liquidity. So you also get that kind of thing. You get regulators who believe that free markets should dominate and that the government should step in as little as possible. That's the negative. It benefits on both sides. With Democrats, you tend to be much more pro-housing and pro-government's role in housing. So you tend to get a lot stronger support for the GSEs, for FHA's role, and desires to expand. Hell, the Biden plan calls for 13,000 first-time homebuyer credit for all first-time homebuyers. We had one in the Obama administration that was half that amount, and it kicked ass. Oh, pardon my French, but it did. And so first-time homebuyer tax credit would be really a great boon for housing. So, but at the same time, you can be assured that the next regulator, the CFPB, isn't going to be have the same profile. And my own sense of that is, honestly, it won't be that bad because we behaved really well as an industry this time. We're not trying to fix subprime and negams and stated incomes and all that kind of stuff. And we have responsible underwriting and responsible mortgage products, maybe too tight, some might argue, in terms of the product set. But nevertheless, that's what you get on both sides. So whatever the turnout, whatever happens here, look, I work for Obama. You can say what you want, but I'm not I worry about the far left of the Democratic Party. I worry about the far right of the Republican Party on business and the economy. I think both have negative implications. But whatever the outcome comes here, I do worry if we retain this administration that we need to try to get Calabria out of that job. And so I think the industry collectively needs to pressure the White House to pull him out and put someone in who's less erratic for us, because those fee impacts, what he just did this past week was like, as I said in the media, giving our industry a middle finger, because you guys all had locked pipelines. You had commitments to consumers, which you have to keep your obligation to, and he didn't take any credence to that and simply put this policy in place, which is going to cost the industry collectively hundreds of millions of dollars if he doesn't change it. So it'll be interesting outcome, whatever happens.
That's for sure.
How are we doing, guys? We done? Is Calabria on a fixed term? Yeah. I'll end with this. So Calabria is on a 5-year term, as is Kathy at the CFPB, 5 years from the date they were confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Calabria was confirmed February of 2019, believe it or not, or March, I think, of 2019. Actually, it was first week of April. I'm sorry, April 8th or 9th. 2019, Mark was confirmed by the Senate. So he has 5 years from that date to be in the job. Kathy has 5 years. She was confirmed earlier. But as you know, the Supreme Court ruling would allow the president to remove the CFPB director without cause. And so the campaign won't say anything, but I'm highly confident that they will remove Kathy immediately, pretty quickly coming into office if the Biden team comes in, and Kathy will be done. Mark is a different case. A lot of lawyers believe that that's a precedent that the Supreme Court made that would apply equally to the FHFA, that they're also a single directorship that's only terminable for cause. And that's essentially what the ruling said by the Supreme Court against the CFPB. So I think if the president wants to, if it's a change of administration, or even if Trump stays, they could test the Supreme Court case and terminate the director at will, and then see if the director wants to challenge that in the courts. But anyway, a lot of gobbledygook. Gang, good to be with you. Good to see so many familiar names and faces. Colleen and Amanda, thanks a lot for having me, and hope you guys have a great rest of your year, and make hay while the sun shines and save your earnings.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here today. Everybody have a great afternoon. Bye.
Hey, guys.
See you guys.